This is Capitalize Your Finances, the show representing you, a select group of excited, ready, and fired up listeners seeking to potentially maximize your money moves and get after it. We don't settle for generic advice of always and nevers. Our currency is our intellect, and we constantly seek the logical way of likely creating advantages to potentially maximize wealth for our personal and unique situations. This show brings you the step-by-step framework to capitalize your finances in the aspects of your financial situation, and we strive to explore strategies and ideas to potentially help you capitalize on your financial decisions. We are capitalizers, and this is our show.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Panayiotou, the Cap and Capitalize. And today we have an extremely special and unique guest. He is, well, really, he's a series of things, but as of today, he's the host of the Deep Wealth podcast and CEO of Deep Wealth, where he guides, him and his partner guide, business owners to the promised lands of extreme liquidity and buyouts. The legendary Jeffrey Feldberg, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for those kind words. And for all you listeners out there, you can't believe everything you heard, especially what Chris said. So we'll see if I live up to that very generous introduction. Thanks so much.
You are going to live up to it. And before we dive into your journey, because one thing that I loved about getting to know you is you got a lot of these consultants out there, so to speak. And consulting can mean anything, as you and I know. And in many times, consulting can kind of mean useless. But for you, you actually went through a sale, and a pretty substantial sale. We're going to talk about that later on in the episode. But before we dive into your journey on how you and your business partner sold your business, Embanet, if I said that correctly, for 9 figures. Again, 9 figures. Give our capitalizers some background on how your life led you to starting Embanet in the first place. Like, where did you grow up? What was your family like? Was money or business talked about? Give us a brief background.
Great question. So came from a family of immigrants who came to the country, and we've all heard the stories. Theirs was very similar. Whatever they had was in their pocket, on their back, in the suitcase. It wasn't much, and came to provide a better life for the next generation. So I grew up in that environment, hearing about the days in the old country and how fortunate we were to have this opportunity in front of us where education is really important. But what was key for me, both my father and his brother, my uncle, really entrepreneurs at heart. They were my role models, my superheroes. And so growing up, I saw these two incredible men really solve painful problems out there, make the world a better place for the people in their business, in the community. And that really set the stage for me. So I was in my MBA program, and it's really a whole other episode, but long story short, in the MBA program, there was a problem. And the problem was, how do you actually have a life, enjoy the program, and get the work done? Because we weren't doing that. In our group, we were threatening to leave the group, getting into all kinds of arguments, working after school on these assignments before classes started, on the weekends, weekend nights. And I said, there's got to be a better way. This can't be, for the next 2 years, it can't be this MBA jail. And so that's where, for really my own pain, came up with a solution. And to put this in perspective, this was in the mid-90s. So the internet, it was just coming around. When you spoke of the web, it was a spider's web. It wasn't the internet like we call the web today, or the World Wide Web back in the day, but came up back then with what some people would call an intranet, or today it would be like one of your social media platforms, where we would work remotely. It wasn't even the internet. They were calling in through something called a modem. For you listeners who don't know what that is, it's like a special phone for the computer that one computer talks to another computer. And it was this system. I had some software that another company produced. I customized it and had that for our group. Worked really well for our group. I actually felt guilty. We went to the top group in the class, barely spent time doing all the studying, and in the second semester introduced it to the rest of the school. It took off like wildfire. And then upon graduation, and sometimes you don't see the trees from the forest. I didn't know what I was going to do the week before graduation. I had no idea. And then it dawned on me, hey, Jeffrey, take the system that you did in your MBA program and take it to other business schools across the country. And that's what slowly began the journey. Graduated, working out of my parents' attic, Failure was my new best friend. Didn't know it at the time. I didn't know I signed up for a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks. I mean, it was a slog. I was looking around, my friends signed these very lucrative contracts at these wonderful corporations, all these bonuses, cars, vacation, and Jeffrey's living with his parents, nothing to show for it. So some challenging times. But despite my best efforts, the company became successful. It was my grit, my passion that kept me in the game long enough. And when that happened, that's really where, Chris, the story picks up where you and I will talk about. I had a knock at the door from a buyer, Fortune 10 company, 7-figure offer, family and friends very excited. Jeffrey, you can move out of your parents' attic. Look at this. It was all the worthwhile. And then I surprised everyone. I said no, especially the buyer. I said no to the 7-figure offer. I said, yes, how do you master this thing called a liquidity event? Now, liquidity event, 2 words that I use are kind of stuck-up words. They're really fancy words. But why I like them, if you're going public, if you're taking some chips off the table, if you're having a full exit, if you're having a partial exit, anything else in between, liquidity event covers it all, because the one thing in common, regardless of the scenario, the more valuable your company is, the better off you are. So for the next 2 years, I was flying across the country, taking all these phone calls, meeting with, as I call them, the cast of characters in mergers and acquisitions, investment bankers, M&A lawyers, strategists, business owners who really, well, they kind of fumbled it. They dropped the ball. They lost really big. Or business owners who hit a grand slam, did a lot of asking questions, didn't talk a lot, took a lot of notes, put this system together for myself and my business partner. And when we went back out to market, as you mentioned in the introduction, this time, different buyer, different offer. We said yes to a 9-figure offer. And that's really from very humble beginnings, having some incredible role models. I literally stand on the shoulders of giants in terms of what I learned along the way, and the many, many entrepreneurs who really schooled me, guided me, mentored me as I was going through that journey. My business partners could not have done it without them. And for me, no one is self-made. It really, the big guy upstairs, that's a whole other thing. But for me, that's a very important part of my life. And the people in my life, it was really a journey of people helping people to ultimately get to where we got to.
Well, it's such a fascinating story. And we're going to dive into the nitty-gritty details later on in the show. I do want to take a step back because, when your family came over and immigrated, and it's like the classic story, right? Not a lot in their pocket, not a lot of hope, figuring things out. And then you took that torch and obviously ran with it. So from a money standpoint, you saw a lot of, and gained a lot of inspiration from your father and your uncle. But was business and money talked about a lot? Or was this all just you watching and intuitively absorbing this knowledge?
It was all of the above. I was just insatiable for learning about business. When I was very young, I knew that one day, I didn't know what, but I would be in business. So as an example, going through high school, I got involved in a multi-level marketing. It has a terrible reputation and name, that industry, but that's where I learned how to tell stories and selling water purifiers as an example, and just going through that, or talking business with my father. And my father, God bless him, you know what? He was every infomercial's ideal customer. He bought everything. And so one day I was maybe 12 or 13, and he came to me, hey, Jeffrey, I saw this incredible infomercial. I ordered you a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And when it comes, we'll go through that together. And so it's things like that he was doing to really encourage me along the way. Or when I would see my uncle, my father would take me on the weekends to visit my uncle at his business, seeing what was going on there. So business was talked about. It really was never about money for my father or for my uncle. It was, okay, how are we making a difference? How are we helping people? And their core belief, which was passed along to me, if we help enough people get what they want, if we can solve their problem and do it enough times, that eventually we'll be able to achieve and get what we want. But it's never going out there, how am I going to enrich myself at the expense of other people? It was always, how do I help people? And only over time can I help myself.
Interesting. Well, for you in your business, I actually want to go into Embonet's early days. And for listeners that are unfamiliar, what was the original business model and strategy?
Absolutely. So let me set the stage. So it was
Set the stage.
It was the mid-90s, and the internet, or the World Wide Web, as it was called back then, when we launched the business, it was considered a fad. Some people thought, yeah, it's not going to last. Don't waste your time with this. It was not like today. You had, again, these dial-up modems. It was very slow. To go to a typical web page like we see today, it could take a minute, not a second, a minute for that web page to load. You had a modem. It was dialing up to something like, maybe I'm going to date myself a little bit, America Online or CompuServe or Prodigy, these different internet providers. Later on, it was these mom and pop shops at these video stores. So it was just so new. It was cutting edge. But the problem that, we'll call it MBNet 1 when we first began. So the problem that MBNet 1 solved was initially for business programs. And, I remember in my MBA program, one of my strategy profs, he always said, I'd always rather be lucky than smart. And so we were lucky. We started off in particularly the executive MBA programs, and we were really lucky because from the executive MBA programs, our very first client was Colorado State University. With their program, they were doing it through video conferencing. Now, the problem that they had was when you're doing back then what was called remote learning, or what today we call online learning or e-learning, there's a high dropout rate. And so our claim to fame, we became the golden child of making these programs profitable by having a high retention rate. So for all you business owners out there, imagine for a moment, every 10 customers that you sign up, 7 of them, 6 of them, 8 of them leave you. It's not a great business model, but that's what it was like for online learning. So MBNet comes along, and we offered 24/7 support. We offered course conversion. So we take these really boring online courses, actually make them interesting. We would do all kinds of training. We do the hosting. So you had a reliable system, someone answering the phone, which was really yours truly in the early days, 24/7, email, phone, whatever the case may be, to ensure that the students stayed in the seats and the program became profitable. And that's really the problem that we're solving at that time. And it was difficult for universities to do that. The IT department had no idea what to do. They were overwhelmed. Again, this was bleeding edge, not even cutting edge. And so we filled that need at that point in time.
And so how quickly did that original business model change? Because I've never met a business owner that says, yep, started the business and 40 years later, we haven't changed a thing.
Again, would rather be lucky than smart. And we were lucky because what happened was a few things. So firstly, the MBA program was in the broader picture of continuing education, which is a much bigger marketplace than just the MBA program. And talk about not thinking ahead. So when we started MBNet, it was originally E.MBA, Space NET, Electronic MBA Network, which back in the day, looking back, was a mistake because we weren't thinking far enough. Hey, we're going to go beyond MBA programs. Let's come up with perhaps a name that covers it all. But anyways, what happened from there was I would just, out of instinct, when I would be speaking to customers, I'd say, hey, Chris, just before we hang up the call, it's been great catching up with you today. What's keeping you up at night when it comes to your business? It's really a simple question. It takes 10 seconds to ask, and I don't even know where that came from again. Let's just call it lucky. I'll take that. And so again, Colorado State University, John Clark, the associate dean, said, Jeffrey, it's so funny that you asked me that question. I actually have a board meeting later today, and I've got to get up in front of my board. It's going to be very uncomfortable, and I'm going to tell them our enrollments are down. In fact, Jeffrey, you're going to bill me less next semester. I don't have the students. I've got this thing called the internet that's starting to take away students. Some of my competitors have set up shop locally. Some of them have set up video conferencing. And my marketing isn't what it used to be. Do you think you can help me? Since you asked me, do you think you can help me? And being young and inexperienced and cocky and a little bit of an ego, I said, yeah, John, of course. Give me 2 weeks. I'll figure it out. And we weren't a marketing company. We were an online company. The only marketing that we did was for ourselves. But I really felt John's pain. And again, for me, being a business owner, a founder, an entrepreneur, how do we help people? How do we solve problems? And so that 2 weeks really became 2 years. It took us 2 years to figure it out. But I saw why John was failing. And the problem was that the traditional marketing solutions for, let's call Colorado State, and we ended up working with Vanderbilt University, George Washington University, Boston University. Let's call them a tier 1 institution. Most marketing programs or marketing shops didn't understand the kinds of tier one institutions, the reputation, how you go market. It was more kind of, I'll call it the trashy marketing that was going on. And it just turned people off. Listen, if you're going to spend $40,000, $80,000, $100,000 per year on a degree, that marketing better line up with what the program's all about. And so we weren't the first to invent marketing. We weren't the first to invent online, but we put it together in such a way that we took the risk off the table, and it just worked. By the way, we wrote a whole ebook, Why Your Business Model Sucks and What You Can Do About It Today. Well, my business model, Chris, sucked from the beginning. It was terrible. And most business models, most owners, it's terrible because we do what everyone else is doing. I didn't know any different. And we probably don't have recurring revenue. It's pay as you go and all those other things. So we stumbled upon, again, I'd rather be lucky than smart, but we stumbled upon what we now call in the Deep Wealth, our 90-day Deep Wealth Mastery Program. It's an X factor, step number 2. It's the holy grail of business models. There's 3 pillars to it. So pillar number 1, this is where you have recurring revenue. So your clients, they know exactly what they're going to spend in a month, a quarter, or a year, and so do you. You know what your cash flow is going to be. Number 2, it's long-term exclusive contracts. And then number 3, this is really the holy grail of holy grails, it's revenue sharing or profit sharing. Now, by the way, to go from one pillar to the second pillar to the third pillar, in order to get clients to do that, it's incredibly difficult. So let's look to MBNet 1 and MBNet 2. So MBNet 1, that's where we did the hosting, the 24/7 support, the course conversion. And then MBNet 2 was everything that MBNet 1 did, but it was now we did all the marketing, all the copywriting, all the advertising. We even pre-enrolled the students into the program with the university's permission and blessing, of course. And we did everything but graduate the student. And by the way, the university didn't pay a penny. That's why we had these 10-year exclusive contracts. At the end of 10 years, it would be a 50-50 split between the two of us. But from the first student onwards, the university was profitable because we paid the faculty for their time, for the courses that we took that information. They owned the intellectual property. We trained the faculty. They got paid for that. We trained the small group instructors. The university got paid every step along the way. So if a program flopped, and they never did, and there's a whole other story behind that, but if a program flopped, it cost the university $0. So there was zero risk. So if you're a dean, if you're the president of the university, I have more to gain than to lose. And I know some of you are saying, well, Jeffrey, as a university, why would I want to give up my revenue? Why would I want to give you a 10-year contract? And they asked us all those questions. Believe me, the faculty, who are you? Why should we even work with you? Why should we trust you? We've got our reputation of the university, my reputation as a professor. You guys are nobody. You're nothing. I mean, we heard it all. But at the end of the day, when you ask the question, well, are we worse off or better off? They always came away saying we're better off, even giving up some of those things, because a smaller piece of a bigger pie is better than an entire pie that maybe doesn't even exist. And that's how we're able to do that, because we solve such a painful problem. And Chris, I'll end it on this, and I'll throw it back to you. Timing is everything. If we would have thought of the system and said, okay, you know what? We'll take our time with this. Well, maybe 3 years from now, 5 years from now, we'll revisit this. That exact same solution later on, we would not have been able to get the holy grail of business models, because we were one of the first ones to do it. We were, again, on the bleeding edge of this. Our knowledge partners, as we call them, the universities, they really benefited from that, because together we were making waves. We created a market disruption before anybody else could. So I'll use the term blue ocean. We created our own category. We set the rules. We actually were able to get alumni for them when they graduated that were better or as good, if not better, than your on-campus alumni. I mean, it's just a success story all the way through, from single working moms to high-ranking government officials to Fortune 10, Fortune 100 CEOs. We were working with all those people to literally change the social fabric of society one e-learner at a time.
Yeah. Well, and I have to ask, because you mentioned tier 1 universities. So did you go after my alma mater, University of Oregon?
You know what? Short answer is no, because
devastating.
But it's nothing to do with it being a tier 1 or not. And this is another terrific lesson that I learned early on. Do what you do really well and don't spread yourself thin. So as an example, we started with, everything started with Colorado State University. It turns out that someone who was at Colorado State University went to Boston University and became the associate provost. And so for MBANET 2, it was Boston University that we started working with. And we started with one program. It was criminal justice, of all things, but that criminal justice became a huge success online. It became the largest program in the country. And, at that point, we could have gone after the University of Oregon or all these other different universities. That would have taken time and effort. And instead what we said, okay, we know the associate provost. We're very fortunate. We got to meet the team, the president. We went back to the university and said, hey, you know us now. We did this in the criminal justice program. Are there some other programs that we can help and do the same thing with? And so we began to expand. Now, the other thing, and some people of your community and your listeners that may disagree with me, to each his or her own, I'm all about bootstrapping, or what I call the cockroach startup mindset. And my thesis is this. If MBANET would have been private equity backed, so if someone would have written us a check for 9 figures, hey, go do your stuff, we would not have been successful. Resources compared to resilience is nothing. So another way of saying that is resilience trumps resources, because we didn't have the money, or because even if we could write the check, we had to justify it. We had to figure out better ways of doing things. And so our resilience really led the way to become innovative and to do things that others thought would have been impossible, but we didn't know any better. And so we achieved it. And so by being very strategic, very methodical, very focused, we kept to a small number of knowledge partners and had massive success because of that. So the takeaway is you don't need to be in a gazillion places. Do what you do really well and scale within those circles, and let it be organic growth that leads the way, because that's what's real. That's what keeps you here today as well as tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, and I still won't hold it against you that you didn't go after my alma mater, but that's
gracious,
for another time.
very gracious.
Now, for you, because obviously this wasn't just you. There was you and your business partner. How quickly did you scale in terms of employee count?
Great question. We were a little bit behind the curve with that. We hired, a lot of companies, and I see this a lot in private equity-backed companies, nothing against private equity. What they do, though, is they have something called a burn rate. So when they invest in a company, okay, Jeffrey, here's our check for however big it is. We're going to measure you by how quickly you spend the money. And so a lot of my competitors were private equity backed, and generally speaking, they're hiring like crazy. They're in all these Class A offices, and they got a gazillion people. We were the opposite. We were cramped into these offices. It was, elbow to elbow. We would only hire people when we realized we needed to hire people, not the other way around. Sometimes that would create problems, being open and honest about that. Sometimes we were a little bit behind the ball, and it put more pressure on the team. But we had this incredible culture of, hey, we're going to defy the odds. We're going to figure this out. We're going to do what we need to do as we need to do it, and not before. And so is it right? Is it wrong? Listen, there's always two sides to a coin, but at least for us, the cockroach startup mindset, the sole focus is you're providing value to people, but you're doing whatever you need to do to live another day. And that's what really allowed us to really frustrate our competition. They were really well backed with private equity, but we beat them more times than not. And who are these guys? They've got no money and they're beating us all the time. What's going on? This is frustrating. How are they doing that? And it was really the culture and the team and the mindset that made the difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've got incredible character, you're going to beat any bank account out there. That's my belief. And for MBANET, and obviously it was not always sunshine and rainbows. That's another thing. I've never met a business owner or executive that has said, yep, since the day we started, it's just been smooth sailing. And so what were the greatest challenges you and your business partner had in building MBANET? But I also wanted to go a step further and ask, was there a moment where it almost went under?
Sure. All great questions. And for myself, I had two other business partners, Waleska and Steve Wells were the three of us, the triad, if you will. And the biggest challenge that we had in any business, I don't care what industry you're in, you put an investment into the business, and for us, it was everything. So there was no plan B. It was, okay, if this doesn't work, we've got nothing. In fact, when we started MBANET 2, by that point, MBANET 1 had slowly, not right out of the gates, but slowly began to throw some profits off, and we'd put that off to the side, and then we redeployed all that. And if MBANET 2 didn't work, we'd have nothing to show for it. By the way, though, if we didn't do MBNet 2, MBNet 1 either would have gone out of business or it would have just been a very slow decline in revenue and profits, because today's success, ironically, that's what has tomorrow's seeds of failure. If we don't change, if we say, oh, what worked yesterday is going to work today, not the case. But our challenge was, as we hit certain milestones, which were amazing milestones, I mean, the growth was up, revenue's up, profits up, clients up, number of enrollments are up. But then we had to make this massive investment back into the company for infrastructure. It wasn't like today, we didn't have the cloud. We had to create our own cloud. So it wasn't like, okay, we need some more server space. Let's just go to Amazon, AWS, and we have an instant server. It was hiring all these people or phone systems, and it was a massive investment. Managers, supervisors, leaders, and figuring that out. For me, the hardest part, it never got easier when we're hiring. Are we making the right decisions? Firing somebody, I never got used to that. That was always the toughest part. It could have been the first hire or the 101st fire that we did. That was always hard for me. You have the human dynamics, even though the person really messed up and maybe wasn't the best fit, there's still a person, and having to deal with that was really tough. But the one thing that we did, we always said, okay, we're going to run this company that if the revenue turned off tomorrow, we have 6 months of revenue or savings in the bank that we can run this company on if needed. And so that really helped out quite a bit. But it got to the point where we had to check our egos at the door, Chris, and we had to say, okay, MBNet is like a child, and the child has now begun to grow up. To take it to the next level, which would be a much larger entity, a much larger corporation, can I do that? Can Waleska do that? Can Steve do that? And the answer was, okay, sure, we could. Would we enjoy it? No. Would we be the best at it? No, we wouldn't. It really wasn't our skill set. We're entrepreneurs. We're not the corporate type. And so recognizing that this company that you've built, that you love, that is your heart and soul, for it to continue to change the social fabric of society, it's no longer going to be you at one point. It's going to need to be a team of professionals who can do what you can't do to take it to the next level. So that emotionally was a mind shift. It was hard, but it was also what was needed.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotu, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
Well, and I want to actually fast forward a little bit to when you and your business partners were thinking about selling the business and transitioning into the next chapter of your life. Because you basically just summed up, right? You're hitting all these milestones. Every metric is up. It's like, the scene, this is probably not the best scene, but like Wolf on Wall Street, when it's just going crazy and everyone is going wild. But again, no drugs and no, illegal activity, right? All above board. But the craziness and that adrenaline, I imagine it was there. So when you guys were thinking about that transition, how many years were you thinking that it was time to make that transition? And was there a moment that caused you to shift that mindset from I'm an entrepreneur to, okay, I think it's time to sell?
Yeah, I really need to give Steve Wells the credit on that side. Steve is a little bit ahead of myself and Waleska on this game called life. He was, born before us, a little bit older than us, not much, but enough. And, he would say from time to time, look, Jeffrey Waleska, I'm further down the path than you are, and I love what we're doing, but at one point, it'd be nice to see what does our future look like. Is there life outside the business? Because, I don't know about you, but I can't be doing this from now till infinitum. We should talk about that. And keeping an open mind to that. But what really accelerated it, we were approached by a company, a Fortune 10 company, under the guise of, let's see if we can do a joint venture together. But I read the smoke signals well in advance, and I said to Steve and Waleska, I said, hey, they don't want to just do a joint venture. They want to buy us. So I know we don't have any intent of selling right now because we haven't achieved in the company what we want, but why don't we go through this as an exercise? Let's see what we know. Let's see what we don't know. Let's see where our weak spots are so that when we are ready, we'll really be ready. And that really accelerated the process. So we went through that and we got the 7-figure offer. I call the buyer a wolf in sheep's clothing. Part of that is true. The other part, though, is we got an offer that we deserved. We had no idea what we were doing. We were like most business owners. All you business owners out there, do not, I repeat, do not show up for your liquidity event or for your exit. You need to prepare well in advance. Because if you don't show up, like this Fortune 10 buyer did with us, very smart and experienced, pulled every trick in the book, and gave us a low value, knowing that, hey, if Jeffrey and company accept this, I'll pocket those other zeros down the road because we know what we're doing and we know what the company isn't doing. And so everyone's just playing his or her part, and there's no blame going on here. It just is what it is. And so that 7-figure offer, in part, was a reflection of how we weren't prepared and what we weren't doing that we should have been doing.
So Jeff, you talked about, once you made the commitment that you were going to sell and things that you did to earn a higher return on investment, what were some of the steps that you wish you took looking back that you recommend to your clients now?
Chris, it's a great question. And I realized when we said no to that 7-figure offer, I realized that the skills to build a business are not the same skills to sell it. And that's the fatal mistake that most business owners make. We don't read about that. We don't hear about that enough. And again, I've drunk the Kool-Aid. You would expect me to say this. I'll give the big picture answer, but I'll go into some of the details. What I wished I would have had back then is what we now call the 90-day deep wealth mastery with the deep wealth 9-step roadmap. Of course, you'd expect Jeffrey to say that. That's what I do. But the reason that I do that is I'm going to kind of fast forward a little bit, and then I'll answer the question very directly. Truth be told, Chris, I should not be speaking to you. I should be on some beach drinking, pick your drink, I don't know, pina colada, margarita, whatever, just chilling and relaxing. But when news got around of the deal, I had founders, friends, entrepreneurs, business owners, hey, Jeffrey, heard what you guys did. Can you give me some tips? What can I do? And the challenge that we had was the system that I had created, it was really for us internally. It wasn't that I was being secretive and I didn't want to share anything. I could give you all the notes. It wouldn't make any sense to you. And so when I looked around, okay, is there a book, a seminar? Is there a company? Is there an advisor that does this? In some cases, it was a flat no. In other cases, well, sure, there are, but wow, isn't it expensive? And not only is it expensive, the people doing it weren't in the trenches. So it's like, Chris, you're saying, Jeffrey, here's a big check. You're going to teach me how to fly a plane. Okay, Chris, one problem. I've never flown a plane before in my life. Not going to be a good outcome here. And so very reluctantly, we came out of retirement, if you will, and that's where we created the Deep Wealth 9-step roadmap. Full disclosure, we did not have all 9 steps when we did our liquidity event. No one's perfect. We made lots of mistakes. The biggest mistakes that we made, some of those mistakes we reverse engineered and put them back into the system. So for all you business owners out there, here's my favorite question, because I answered no to this question. And I want you to be honest when you're answering this question. It's a yes, it's a no. I don't want any in-betweens. I don't want any excuses. I don't want any hums or ums or buts. Does the business run without you? And if you're saying, well, of course it does. I have a management team. I have a leadership team. Does it really run without you? Or are they coming to you for your blessing for every major decision? Chris, for most business owners, the business does not run without them. And it's a huge problem. Let's look to buyers. What does a buyer want to do? Well, what do we want to do? Chris, when we're making an investment, when you're working with me, Chris, you're taking my portfolio and you're helping me plan my future wealth. You're saying, Jeffrey, as a custodian, my fiduciary responsibility, I'm going to minimize your risk. I'm going to maximize your profit. Well, why would a buyer or an investor of your company be any different? And so when your company doesn't run without you, one of two things will happen. A buyer or investor will run in the other direction as fast as they can because they don't want this blowing up in their face and getting a second full-time job, otherwise known as your business, because you're not around to run it. Or they'll say, hey, terrific, I'm going to put a huge penalty onto the value of the business. It doesn't run without Jeffrey, and not where I want to be. So neither of them are good scenarios, and that's why we want the business to run without us. And so when you're thinking about that, it doesn't run without you. It takes time. You've got to put a management team in place. And that was really one of the shortcomings for Embanet. We did put a management team in place. The buyer came to us and said, look, guys, come on. We have not started doing this yesterday. We see this all the time. Yes, your leadership team, they are terrific. They are world class. Yes, we get it. They have their accomplishments. But truth be told, they've been in place for a little over a year. We really would prefer to see a management team in place for at least 3 years, preferably 5 years or more. So yeah, we hear you. We'll give you partial credit for that, but we're going to have to take that into consideration as well because it is a risk. And that's one of many examples. Chris, I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question. How can you master something you've never done before? And as you're thinking about that, how can you master something you've never done before when it comes to the largest and most important financial decision of your life, otherwise known as selling your company or bringing in an investor into your company? And the short answer is you can't. Well, you could, but it's going to be at your expense. Or you can be smart about this and find people, proven systems, strategies from the trenches that do it. So it's a very long-winded answer to your question. I wish back in the day when I said, hey, we don't know what we don't know, that we would have had in this 90-day system that we put together that walks us through everything from, okay, what's going on in the industry? What's the big picture? What are these inflection points that can put us out of business? By the way, earlier in the interview, I said I'd rather be lucky than smart. Well, having that phone call with that customer, hey, what keeps you up at night? That customer identified an inflection point, what some people call a blind spot. So the industry is changing. I didn't know about that because usually it's our customers. They're on the front lines. They see it first. If I would have missed that, if I would not have asked that question, there would not have been an Embanet 2. We would not be having this call. We would not be out there, deep wealth, changing the social fabric of society, one business owner, one liquidity event at a time. And so in the system, we start with, well, what is an inflection point? How do you find them? What questions do you ask? When you do find them, how do you deal with that to start a market disruption, to put yourself out of business into a bigger business? And through each of the steps, each of the 9 steps, we go through that. So on the 91st day, you haven't sold your company, but you've done really 3 things. You've put in close to 30 launch plans or blueprints to grow your business, your profits, to help you set up a market disruption, to put yourself out of business into a bigger business. While you're doing that, at the same time, you don't even realize it, you're preparing for your future liquidity event. You're saving your money, your health, your time. And the major catastrophe, the biggest failure that I had, believe it or not, Chris, post-exit. I never planned for my post-exit life. I didn't even know about the post-exit life. I was so focused on crossing the finish line. I didn't care to ask the right questions. So my ignorance had me make some of the biggest mistakes of my life. Period. Full stop. End of story. That today, I'm still cleaning up those mistakes. So in the 90-Day Deep Wealth Mastery program, and I know it may sound like an infomercial or commercial, it really isn't. It's from the trenches. I'm very passionate about this because we change lives. I see it every day, how we're changing lives. Not even step 1. It's step 0. It's the welcome module. We talk about the post-exit life, where I've gone out and I brought in other entrepreneurs who, like myself, never found their happily ever after. They were miserable at home. I got news for you. No one feels sorry for some wealthy person at home in his or her pajamas with nothing to do, bored out of their mind, and no one wants to come out to play because they have their careers, their businesses, their lives. And so we talk all about that in the welcome module. How today do you ensure that in your post-exit life, you've already created that? You have that momentum. You're not starting from a standing stop, that you already know what you're going to do with that new white space that's going to be coming into your life. So again, a long-winded answer, but the takeaway for all your listeners, we don't know what we don't know. You can't master something you've never done before, and the skills that built your business are not the same ones to bring in that investor or to sell it.
Yeah. Well, and if I could get one massive takeaway of what you did between the first offer and the second was instill the management team, but you wish you could have done that 5 years or even 7 years earlier, because frankly, that would have solidified a lot of things to a potential buyer and make sure that the business can run without you. Now, I have to ask, This is a very surface level question, but it's a fun one. So when the deal closed and the money hit your bank account, what did that moment feel like?
Sure. Before I go there, let me put one other incredibly important thing, because I want you to think about this, and for the listeners, it's huge. 7 figures, 9 figures. Well, I have a revelation. It was the same company. Okay, it was a few years later, but it was the same company. We weren't acquiring other companies. Why such a difference? So the management team was part of that, the leadership team that we put in place, but we learned how to tell narratives. Narratives, the right narrative, a compelling narrative, Chris, that's what gets you a new client. That's what keeps your clients. That's what also enhances the enterprise value. It increases your enterprise value. You mentioned I'm on my own podcast, the Deep Wealth Podcast. I brought on valuators, and they all say the same thing. Jeffrey, when I'm valuating a company, 80% of that enterprise value comes from the narrative. The facts, the data come after the fact. And so welcome, Chris, and your listeners and the community. I want you to be welcome to the art side of business and of a liquidity event. Because enterprise value, profits, it doesn't show up in some complicated spreadsheet in a formula. That's after the fact. That's looking in the rearview mirror. It's what we're doing with the narratives that we create. And we build in the facts, of course, and the data, but how we share that narrative, how that gets into the culture, how we do all those things. So I want you to think about that. Now, to your question, it was interesting. So I was not celebrating until the wire hit the bank. Mm-hmm. Wire hits the bank. It was late in the day, and my nerves, I was just all crazy. But I went to sleep, and this is going to maybe sound surprising. I haven't really shared this before. It's a great question. Not a lot of people have really ever asked it. So the next morning, I woke up, eyes open. What's going through my mind? So the first thing is, hey, it really did happen. I'm not dreaming. This huge liquidity event, it's there. Wow. All this financial freedom that comes with that. And for a brief moment, it was incredible. I can't even put words around it. It was just joyous and so much gratitude and prayers answered. And there's a whole other episode that we could do of how the deal went off the rails a gazillion times. And there were parts where I didn't even think that was going to happen. But here's the interesting part, and this is part of my failure that I was talking about earlier. After that moment went by, I still had the same hopes, the same fears. I was still the same person. Yes, the bank account was a lot different than it was a day before. But me as a person, I was the same person. And it may be hard to believe if you're not there. And I've been on both sides. No money. Having some zeros in the bank account. Not having some zeros in the bank account from mistakes that have been made and building it back up and everything else in between. But it really is true that, okay, yes, money, it can make life smoother. It can make life easier. As I learned the hard way, it does not buy happiness. Happiness comes from within and has nothing to do with money. And so if you're not prepared for that post-exit life, I don't care how many zeros you have in the bank account. As a person, a week later, a month later, a year later, believe it or not, the same feelings that you're having will be very similar. Okay, maybe different issues, different pressures perhaps, different kinds of things that are coming up. But some of the things that proverbially keep you up at night will still keep you up at night if you haven't figured that out as a person. So maybe not the answer that you were perhaps looking for, but that's how it was, at least for me, a data point of 1.
Yeah, well, and I was not looking for any particular answer. I could only imagine, full disclosure, I have not sold a business for 9 figures, but your answer, it doesn't shock me, because it's the whole adage of, or saying of, you enjoy the process, you live with the proceeds, and fall in love with basically the journey, not the destination. And I mean, I can just speak from experience, not, specifically yours, but that's no different than building my business or starting this podcast or writing my book. It's like, you go through the firsts of all of these, and then you recognize, oh my gosh, I should have had fun along the way. Now, sometimes you can't afford to have the fun if you're just, let's just tell you, broke as hell, right? And you don't have a lot of opportunity, but you remember those really good times. And it's been healthy for me, because whatever it is, maybe it's another book or another course, I don't know. or the next podcast episode or whatever the case is, you remember the moments that you loved, but you didn't have the ability to love it in the moment, and then you're just much more fulfilled going forward. So I appreciate your answer a ton. I really do.
Two things on that, Chris, that really for the community, for the listeners, is really important. As you're talking about that, I'll share two things before the closing and then after the closing. I still remember to this day, it was a really tough day. This is in the early days of Embanet too. We were failing. We couldn't figure it out. Everything we tried didn't work. We took our life savings, put it all back into Embanet too. And I was with Steve and Waleska, and we're talking and we're planning and we're figuring all these things out. And it was a long day and everyone's tired. And I just kind of stopped. I don't know what gave me that inspiration, but I looked at both of them and I said, I want us to remember this day because I know it's hard, but I'm looking back at this. And whether it's 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, look at the journey, guys, that we're on. We don't know what the future is going to be. We don't know if we're even going to be successful, but I'm with the two of you and we're having fun. And we have this incredible vision of how we're going to change lives. Let's just take in this moment and take in the journey. And that really helped along the way. And so mindset is everything. And it's not how much of a check can I write to maybe go on a vacation or do this or do that to enjoy. We were everything. We were liquidity poor. Everything was in the business. We didn't have the check to write, and the business wasn't doing so well at the time. But then post-exit, some of the most joyous times, and I'm speaking now for myself, for Waleska, for Steve Wells, was when we pulled aside certain employees who had been there from the beginning. It didn't matter what their title were. It was how did they support the business with their time, with their effort, with their mindset, with the culture. And we wrote these big checks. And, giving these checks to them that literally changed their lives. Some people paid off mortgages and were debt-free for the first time ever. Other people put it towards charities. Other people bought rental properties. Other people, they did all kinds of things, but seeing the tears flow and how happy they were and the hugs and the kisses, for me, all these years later, I still remember that. And even for ourselves, where now we could make a difference, and this really goes into what we do at Deep Wealth, where on our part, we found a cause that we were really passionate about, making a difference, where we could make a difference with our time, our insights, our capital. Perhaps we could set up a foundation, and we did in some instances, or find a charity and have them make a difference. And that's really also a part of it because, again, earlier when we started talking, I said no one is an island, him or herself, and we're all given opportunities and all these people help, but the opportunity to pay back. Because working with someone like yourself, you can ensure we can't spend it all, and financially we're set up for life. So if you can't spend it all, why not make a difference and pay it forward? And that's really, for myself today, of why we do what we do, the 90-Day Deep Wealth Mastery Program, the whole 9-step roadmap. If I could be blunt, it's number one, ensuring that business owners that we're successful because the odds are stacked against us. It really is. The system is not meant for us to win. But when we can do that, and quite bluntly, when the graduates of the Deep Wealth Mastery Program are wealthier than they would be otherwise, we really encourage them, hey, take some of that wealth. After you take care of yourself, your family, your friends, of course, make a difference, pay it forward, set up a foundation, find that charity, find a cause that needs some time, attention, and capital, and be the change. And that is just huge when you can do that.
Now I got to ask, because we're all human. And so my question to you is, what was the first guilty pleasure purchase you made after the deal closed?
Yeah, the first guilty pleasure or purchase that was made, yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that we did, and there's a whole other thing in that is, we had bought some property actually to celebrate with that. Now, should I have bought the property or not today? I would have given my younger self some different advice on that. And for your listeners out there, what's that advice you're wondering? And Chris, I'm sure you'd be something similar. Hey, park the money, for a year in something safe where you can't mess it up. You're going to change as a person. Take that year minimum, maybe 2, then come back and revisit it. But again, I shared some of my biggest mistakes were post-exit. And so did some purchases I probably shouldn't have done, Chris. And looking back, they weren't the wisest or the smartest, but one of the first was to buy some property.
Okay. And, I was doing some research on your career, and I know our time is coming to an end here, but I noticed it was interesting. You both took some time off and then didn't at the same time. And what I mean by that is you took a few years off before you got into, I believe it was Corbin Cigar Group, but you wasted no time after the business transition by jumping into Magnum Opus Group. So for your clients, before we close it out, do you recommend that they jump into a new venture immediately or take a bit of time off? I know you just mentioned about the cash, right, and parking it because you change, but there's a difference between that and then actually going on to the next venture if you go on to the next venture.
Sure. Great question. So yes, right away he started Magnum Opus Ventures. And then myself and Steve started Corbin Cigars, which is a private blend. It's a company that really shouldn't be, but it was our passion, and it's invitation only and all that good stuff not available in stores. So I'll share my thoughts on that. The real answer is whatever is right for the person is right for them. But if we look at Jeffrey as a data point of one, and for the listeners out there, for the community, don't do what I did. I did it all wrong, so do the opposite of what I'm about to share. When it closed, I took some time off in the beginning. I was running 24/7 for 13 years. I was traveling 6 months of the year. I missed my eldest daughter growing up for the first 5 years. I have a lot of mistakes that I can't get back. One of the promises I made to myself when that was all going on, if I'm ever in a position, I'm fortunate enough that I can be there I have 2 daughters, for my daughters' school events, parent-teacher interviews, the plays, whatever they happen to be doing, I'm going to do that because I miss so much and I can never get that time back to do that. But after I took some time off and lunch became the highlight of the day, and I was then bored out of my mind, that only lasts for so long, I did get involved right away. And the honest answer of why did you do that, Jeffrey, is because I wasn't prepared. Because in my mind, I had imposter syndrome. I had to justify to myself that I'm still, as crazy as it sounds, a worthy person to myself, to society. That when I'm in a social function, oh, Jeffrey, what do you do? Well, I sit at home in my pajamas. I'm bored all day because I sold my company and, that's it. Doesn't cut it. And because I wasn't prepared, I jumped into ventures. So Magnum Opus Ventures became like a private equity group where we would look at companies and we would invest in them, and we just didn't make the best decisions with that and had to take over some of those companies and run them, and that's a whole other thing. For me anyways, it wasn't the right thing to do. What I would have loved to have done was, while running Embanet, whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years in advance, to figure out what does post-exit look like for me. And when we work with the Deep Wealth community for the business owners, we have them go through, one of the things that they do is they write a letter to themselves when they're 100 years old, and they're looking back. What does my life look like? What did I achieve? What am I proud of? Where did I make a difference? To begin to put together a plan for doing that. And so when you're in a position that you've had a liquidity event, it doesn't mean, and it shouldn't mean, that the next day you're out having to buy companies or start your second venture. Some people, they just travel the world and, hey, that's what floats their boat. That's amazing. Some people want to manage their money. Good for them. Other people do want to start up another venture. Terrific. Other people become philanthropists, or they get into, hey, let me just make a difference out there, and I'm going to support and, do all the charitable kinds of things. Amazing. There's no one right answer. The answer is, what are activities that can fill that white space for you, that leave you feeling energized, that have you feeling fulfilled? Because success without fulfillment, that's a failure. And we never want to be there. We want both success and fulfillment. That's when you have it all.
That is when you have it all. Now, Jeffrey, that is like the perfect cherry on top for the end of the episode. But before I close it out and give our listeners, right, the send it on home, where can our capitalizers go to follow and best support you?
You know what? Drop me a line. Send me an email, and I answer them personally. So it's Jeffrey, Jeffrey, at Deep Wealth, just like it sounds, DEEPWEALTH.com. Jeffrey at deepwealth.com. Drop me a line. Send me an email. You can come to the deepwealth.com. You can go to podcast@deepwealth.com. All things are there, but you can send me an email. Jeffrey at deepwealth.com. Would love to hear from you, hear what your questions are. and see how with Chris and the community and myself and our community, how all of us together, how we can pay that forward and make a difference.
That is fantastic. Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming on the show. And to the listeners, as always, to you veterans out there, you know the drill. For you newbies out there, welcome to the Capitalized community. And if you have any questions about today's episode, you can either give us a call at 253-214-3050. That's 253-214-3050. And I'd be more than happy to answer your questions. If you're more of an email guy or gal, that's totally fine. Hit me up, chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com. And lastly, if you're listening in and you want to be a guest on the show, head on over to capitalizepodcast.com. Shoot me and my team a direct message. We look at it every single day. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Panayiotou, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
Christopher Panayiotou is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Jeffrey Feldberg and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.